Meridian Astor, 32, never imagined that accepting her older sister's dinner invitation would become the catalyst for uncovering decades of family deception. As I sat at the children's table surrounded by sticky-fingered 7-year-olds while watching my sister Vivienne toast with my parents across the room, I realized this deliberate humiliation wasn't random. It was the first public move in a game I didn't know we were playing. Before I dive into this wild family revenge drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever dealt with toxic family members. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how karma finally catches up to my sister's decade of manipulation. And if you think being seated at the kids' table was bad, just wait until you hear what happened next. Growing up as Meridian Astor in the shadow of Vivienne had always been a complex experience. From our childhood in Westchester County, New York, to our adult lives in Manhattan, the dynamic remained unchanged. Vivienne, 5 years my senior at 37, had mastered the art of appearing flawless to everyone outside our immediate family, while systematically undermining me at every opportunity. Our parents, Theodore and Eleanor Astor, had built a respectable upper-middle-class life from humble beginnings. Dad's architectural firm had grown steadily over the decades, while Mom had transitioned from elementary school teaching to becoming a well-regarded educational consultant. They provided us with comfortable childhoods, but the emotional landscape of our family was anything but balanced. Merit doesn't quite have Vivienne's focus, my mother would say to family friends at gatherings using my childhood nickname that I'd long since abandoned. But she's creative in her own special way. These backhanded compliments were the soundtrack of my youth, always positioning me as the lesser sister, the one with potential that somehow never quite materialized. Vivienne capitalized on this narrative. While I struggled through an awkward adolescence, she thrived. She was class president, valedictorian, and secured a full scholarship to Cornell, while I battled undiagnosed ADHD that wouldn't be identified until my sophomore year of college. By then, the family mythology was firmly established. Vivienne was the golden child, and I was the perpetual disappointment. What made it all the more frustrating was how genuinely accomplished Vivienne actually was. After graduating summa cum laude, she secured a position at a prestigious management consulting firm, married Bradley Whitmore, a surgeon from a family with old New England money, and produced 2 picture-perfect children, Eliza and Harrison. Their brownstone in the most desirable part of the Upper East Side was featured in Architectural Digest, and Vivienne had somehow managed to become a board member at 3 different cultural institutions before turning 35. Meanwhile, my path had been less linear. After struggling through undergraduate studies at SUNY, I had found my footing in digital marketing. I built a career from the ground up, eventually becoming a senior strategist at a boutique agency that specialized in nonprofit campaigns. I had recently been headhunted by a larger firm, finally reaching a salary bracket that approached financial comfort in notoriously expensive Manhattan. My modest 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn was a far cry from Vivienne's townhouse, but it was mine, paid for with money I had earned without family connections. My romantic history had been equally tumultuous. A string of relationships had ended painfully, including a 2-year engagement to Jason that dissolved when I discovered he'd been cheating with a colleague. The breakup had happened just 3 weeks before Vivienne's lavish vow renewal ceremony for her 10th anniversary, which she insisted I still attend solo, wearing the bridesmaid dress we'd selected when I was still part of a couple. "It would be selfish to let your personal problems affect my special day," she had said, her voice dripping with that particular tone she reserved for me. Sympathetic on the surface but laced with satisfaction underneath. Despite everything, I maintained a relationship with my family. Weekly Sunday brunches with my parents. Holiday gatherings. Birthday celebrations. I showed up, played my part, and tried to ignore the sideways glances and whispered comments. I told myself it was because family mattered, but deep down I knew I was still seeking approval that would never come. When Vivienne called to invite me to an intimate family dinner at Le Cirque to celebrate her recent promotion to partner at her firm, I agreed without hesitation. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps as adults in our 30s, we could finally move beyond childhood dynamics. It's very exclusive, Vivienne had explained. Bradley has arranged for a private room. Mom and Dad will be there, of course, and a few close friends. We'll be 12 adults total. I had spent an entire paycheck on a new dress for the occasion, a sophisticated emerald green sheath that complemented my auburn hair and made me feel confident. I'd even splurged on a professional blowout and makeup application, determined to present myself as the successful professional I had become, rather than the awkward little sister of family mythology. When I arrived at the restaurant, the maitre d' escorted me not to the main private dining room where I could see my parents and Vivienne through the partially open door, but to an adjoining smaller space where Vivienne's children, and 2 other young cousins, sat with a hired nanny. There must be a mistake, I told the maitre d'. I'm Meridian Astor, Vivienne's sister. I should be in the main dining room. He had looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Miss Astor, but I was instructed to seat you here. Mrs. Whitmore was very specific about the arrangement. When I stepped back into the hallway to peek into the main room, I caught Vivienne's eye. She smiled and waved, then turned back to her conversation with a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. She had seen me, acknowledged my presence, and deliberately left me at the children's table. I stood frozen in the hallway, humiliation washing over me. The nanny looked up expectantly, gesturing to the empty chair beside her, while 8-year-old Eliza giggled with her cousin. Even here I was an afterthought, not quite family, not quite staff, but something undefined and lesser. In that moment, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just another minor slight or passive-aggressive comment. This was a public declaration that in Vivienne's eyes I didn't deserve a place at the adult table. That after 32 years of life, multiple academic degrees, and a successful career, I was still being treated as a child, and not even one worthy of her attention. I could have made a scene. I could have walked into the main dining room and demanded an explanation. I could have left immediately and sent a strongly worded text. But a strange calm descended over me as I realized that this moment represented every interaction we'd ever had, distilled into one perfect crystalline example of how little my sister respected me. Instead of reacting immediately, I smiled at the nanny, took my seat among the children, and began formulating a plan. If Vivienne wanted to play games, I would finally play back, but with one crucial difference. While she had always relied on public humiliation and social manipulation, I would use the truth as my weapon. And there was one particular truth that I had accidentally discovered 3 months earlier that would change everything. The discovery had occurred during our parents' 40th anniversary celebration. While everyone was gathered in the living room of my parents' home sharing memories and toasts, I had excused myself to find the bathroom. Passing by my father's study, I noticed the door ajar and a folder lying open on his desk, labeled Family Trust Amendment. I shouldn't have looked. Under normal circumstances, I would have respected my father's privacy. But something caught my eye, a document with both my name and Vivienne's prominently displayed. Curiosity overcame propriety, and I stepped into the room, glancing at the papers. What I found stunned me into silence. The trust documents revealed that while both Vivienne and I were listed as beneficiaries, there was a startling disparity in the distribution. Vivienne was set to receive 75% of our parents' considerable estate, while I would receive a mere 25%. The amendment had been made recently, dated just 3 months prior. More disturbing than the uneven split was a letter tucked within the folder, a letter from Vivienne to our parents. In it, she detailed concerns about my financial instability and poor life choices, suggesting that I would squander any significant inheritance. She recommended the disproportionate division for Meridian's own good, claiming she would guide her through financial decisions after they were gone. The letter was filled with half-truths and outright lies. She referenced my mounting credit card debt, non-existent. I had cleared my last balance 2 years ago, and impulsive spending habits also false. I lived frugally and had been steadily building my savings. She even alluded to concerns about substance abuse that were completely fabricated. My hands trembled as I read her calculated character assassination. Every setback I had experienced, every struggle I had overcome, my ADHD diagnosis, the painful breakup with Jason, even a brief period of therapy I had undergone after my engagement ended, had been twisted into evidence of my incompetence and unworthiness. The most shocking part was the date of the letter. Vivienne had written it just 1 week after I had confided in her about receiving a significant promotion and raise. During that same conversation, I had excitedly shared my plans to finally purchase an apartment instead of renting, having saved diligently for a down payment. She had seemed supportive, offering congratulations and suggesting we celebrate. That celebration never materialized. Instead, she had gone directly to our parents and systematically undermined my financial credibility. And they had believed her without ever questioning me or seeking my perspective. I had carefully returned the documents exactly as I found them, and rejoined the anniversary party, plastering a smile on my face while my mind raced. For weeks afterward, I grappled with what to do with this information. Confronting my parents seemed impossible. How could I admit I had snooped through my father's private papers? And confronting Vivienne would only give her ammunition to further paint me as emotionally unstable. So I had remained silent, processing my anger and betrayal privately, while maintaining the facade of normal family relations. I began paying closer attention to Vivienne's tactics, noticing how she would casually mention my struggle to find direction to mutual friends, how she would remind our parents of my past mistakes while glossing over her own, how she would position herself as the concerned older sister who just wanted the best for her wayward sibling. During those 3 months between discovering the letter and the humiliating dinner at Le Cirque, I had also been conducting my own subtle investigation. I reached out to former classmates of Vivienne's, reconnected with family friends who had known us since childhood, and even had a casual lunch with Bradley's sister Meredith, with whom I had always gotten along well despite Vivienne's attempts to keep us separated. What emerged was a pattern more disturbing than I had initially realized. Vivienne's perfect image had been meticulously constructed and maintained, not just through her own accomplishments, which were considerable, but through the systematic undermining of others. I wasn't her only target, just her most consistent one. A former college roommate revealed that Vivienne had sabotaged her research project by accidentally deleting crucial files days before a major presentation. Bradley's sister confided that Vivienne had once deliberately misinformed her about a family gathering's dress code, leaving Meredith humiliated when she arrived in casual clothes to a formal event. A colleague who had left Vivienne's firm described how client contacts would mysteriously receive negative information about rising junior consultants who might have threatened Vivienne's path to partnership. Each story followed the same pattern: Vivienne identifying potential rivals or threats, executing calculated moves to undermine them, and then positioning herself as either uninvolved or, even more perversely, as a sympathetic supporter dealing with others' failures. I had begun keeping detailed notes, saving texts and emails, and quietly collecting evidence, not with any specific plan in mind, but with the growing certainty that someday this information would prove valuable. I had even recorded a few conversations with my parents where they repeated information Vivienne had told them about me, information I could definitively prove false. As I sat at the children's table at Le Cirque, watching through the doorway as Vivienne held court in the main room, I realized that the time to use this information had arrived. The public humiliation she had orchestrated was not just another microaggression in our lifelong dynamic, it was a declaration of war, and for the first time I was prepared to fight back. I spent that dinner engaging the children in conversation, learning about their interests, and making them laugh. I treated the nanny with respect, asking about her graduate studies and education that Vivienne had never bothered to acknowledge. I maintained my dignity in a situation designed to strip it away. And as I observed the main table from my isolated position, I noticed something I might have missed had I been seated among the adults. Vivienne was particularly attentive to an older gentleman seated beside my father, a man I recognized as Walter Kingsley, the founding partner of my parents' financial management firm. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm, and ensured his wine glass was never empty. Later, when dessert was served and the children were distracted by elaborate sundaes, I overheard the nanny talking quietly on her phone, mentioning that she needed to update Mrs. Whitmore's calendar to include Mr. Kingsley's foundation event next month. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. This dinner wasn't just about celebrating Vivienne's promotion, it was about positioning her to take control of our parents' financial affairs through their advisor. My exclusion wasn't merely pettiness, it was strategic elimination of potential interference. As I left the restaurant that night, declining Vivienne's disingenuous offer to catch up soon, my resolve hardened. The plan that had been forming in my mind now had a clear direction and purpose. Vivienne had spent decades building her house of cards. I was finally ready to introduce a strong wind. The week following the Le Cirque incident, I took a calculated step back from my usual family interactions. I begged off Sunday brunch with a fabricated work emergency, and kept my text responses to my parents brief but polite. When Vivienne sent a group text with photos from the dinner carefully angled to exclude any evidence of the children's table where I'd been sequestered, I responded with a simple, "Looks lovely," and nothing more. This tactical retreat served two purposes. It gave me space to formulate my strategy without arousal suspicion, and it created the impression that I had been suitably cowed by her latest power play. Vivienne would expect me to withdraw after being publicly humiliated. My compliance with this expectation would keep her guard down. My first action was to leverage my professional expertise. As a digital marketing strategist, I understood data collection and analysis in ways Vivienne, for all her business acumen, did not. I created a secure encrypted folder structure to organize the information I had already gathered and the additional evidence I planned to collect. Next, I reached out to my oldest friend Dara Chen, who had become a paralegal at a prestigious law firm specializing in estate planning. Over coffee in a quiet corner of a cafe far from our usual haunts, I explained my situation without revealing my intentions. "I'm not asking you to do anything unethical," I assured her. "I just need to understand my legal options if I believe my parents are being manipulated regarding their estate." Dara's expression remained professionally neutral, but her eyes reflected concern. "Proving undue influence is challenging," she explained. "You would need substantial evidence showing systematic manipulation, ideally documentation of false statements made with the intent to damage your standing." "And if I have that documentation?" I asked. She hesitated. "Then you'd have options." But Merritt, she was one of the few people who still used my childhood nickname with my blessing. "This kind of family litigation gets ugly fast. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" I wasn't sure. Part of me still hoped for reconciliation, for my parents to see through Vivienne's machinations without legal intervention. But I needed to understand all available avenues. "I'm just gathering information for now," I told her. "Better to know my options and not need them than the reverse." Dara nodded and provided me with several resources on estate law and family trusts. As we parted, she squeezed my hand. "Whatever you decide, document everything. Dates, times, exact wording. Contemporary records carry significant weight." Taking her advice to heart, I began a detailed journal of every interaction with my family. I installed call recording software on my phone, legal in New York with one-party consent, and backed up all text messages and emails to secure cloud storage. My next step was more direct. I scheduled lunch with my mother under the guise of discussing my recent promotion. We met at her favorite bistro near the Metropolitan Museum where she had served on the junior board in her younger days. I was surprised not to see you at the main table last week, she mentioned as we reviewed our menus. Vivian said you preferred to help with the children. The casual lie was so typical of my sister that I almost laughed. Instead, I adopted a mildly confused expression. That's not what happened at all. I was directed to the children's table when I arrived. Vivienne never asked what I preferred. My mother's discomfort was immediate and visible. Oh. Well, there must have been some miscommunication. The seating arrangement was quite tight. Tight enough to exclude only me from a table that seated 12, I asked mildly, maintaining eye contact. She fidgeted with her napkin. Vivienne handled all the arrangements. I'm sure she didn't mean to make you feel left out. Rather than pressing further, I pivoted to a seemingly unrelated topic. I've been thinking about financial planning lately. My new position includes some excellent retirement benefits, and I want to make sure I'm making smart decisions. My mother brightened, visibly relieved by the change of subject. That's wonderful, Merritt. Taking control of your finances is so important. I thought so too. Actually, I've managed to eliminate all my debt and build a substantial savings over the past few years. I was hoping Dad might introduce me to Mr. Kingsley for some professional advice. The flicker in her eyes was subtle but unmistakable. Oh, Walter is really focused on high net worth clients and complex estate planning. Your father and I have worked with him for decades. For someone at your stage, a younger advisor might be more appropriate. My stage, I echoed. Well, early career, simpler financial needs, she clarified hastily. I nodded thoughtfully. I understand. Though with my portfolio now exceeding $300,000, I was hoping for experienced guidance. But you're right, perhaps someone more willing to take on new clients would be better. The figure wasn't an exaggeration. Between my aggressive saving, prudent investments, and recent inheritance from my maternal grandmother, who had left equal amounts to Vivian and me, much to my sister's barely concealed annoyance, I had built a respectable financial foundation, one that directly contradicted the financially irresponsible narrative Vivian had constructed. My mother's surprise was poorly concealed. 300,000. That's impressive. Vivienne mentioned you were having some credit difficulties recently. Did she? How strange. I haven't carried credit card debt in years. My credit score is over 800. I kept my tone light, conversational, as though we were discussing the weather, rather than my sister's deliberate misinformation campaign. I'd be happy to show you my financial statements sometime. I'm actually quite proud of how I've managed things, especially given some of the challenges I've faced. The remainder of lunch passed with superficial conversation, but I had accomplished my goal. I had planted the first seed of doubt about Vivian's reliability as an information source without directly accusing her of lying. I had established a counter-narrative to my supposed financial irresponsibility with specific verifiable facts. And I had confirmed that my parents were actively working with Walter Kingsley on their estate, planning the same Walter Kingsley that Vivian had been so eager to impress at dinner. Over the next several weeks, I systematically expanded my intelligence-gathering operation. I reconnected with cousins and family friends, sharing carefully calibrated versions of my experiences and listening attentively to theirs. I researched Bradley's family connections and financial standing, discovering that despite the appearance of old money, his family's wealth had been significantly diminished through poor investments before his marriage to Vivienne. I even hired a professional investigator, an expense that made me wince, but that I deemed necessary to conduct a thorough background check on both Vivian and Bradley, focusing particularly on their financial history and professional reputations. What emerged was a complex picture of my sister's life beneath the polished exterior. While her career achievements were largely legitimate, her perfect image concealed financial pressures and professional vulnerabilities. Bradley's surgical practice was successful, but burdened with massive overhead costs and malpractice insurance premiums. Their lavish lifestyle, maintained through strategic social climbing and careful image management, operated on much thinner margins than anyone realized. The most valuable piece of intelligence came from an unexpected source. During a charity gala I attended for work, I encountered Bradley's former college roommate, now an investment banker with a loose tongue after several scotches. His casual mention of that mess with Bradley's fellowship funds led to a revelation that Bradley had been quietly asked to resign from a prestigious medical research position after irregularities were found in his expense reporting. Nothing illegal had been proven, but the incident had been hushed up through family connections, and Bradley had pivoted to private practice rather than academic medicine. This explained the abrupt career change that Vivienne had always presented as Bradley's personal choice to focus on patient care rather than research. Armed with this growing dossier of information, I began to see the dinner incident not as an isolated humiliation, but as part of Vivienne's broader strategy. By positioning me as the family childlike figure, unreliable, immature, and financially irresponsible, she was protecting her access to our parents' resources and establishing herself as the natural steward of their legacy. The question that remained was, why now? Why had Vivienne escalated from subtle undermining to public exclusion? What had changed in the family dynamic that made her feel such tactics were necessary? The answer came during a rare phone call with my father, who mentioned offhandedly that he and my mother were rethinking some aspects of their estate plan after my grandmother's passing had raised questions about equitable distribution. That was the catalyst. My grandmother's decision to treat Vivienne and me equally in her will had disrupted the hierarchy Vivienne had worked so carefully to establish. And now, with our parents potentially reconsidering their own unequal distribution plan, she had moved to reinforce the narrative of my incompetence more aggressively than ever. As all these pieces fell into place, my approach crystallized. I didn't want revenge in the conventional sense. I didn't want to destroy Vivienne or expose her to public humiliation. What I wanted was far simpler and more powerful, the truth acknowledged and recognized by those who mattered most. By mid-August, 6 weeks after the Le Cirque incident, I had amassed substantial evidence of Vivienne's systematic campaign to undermine me. What I still lacked, however, was direct proof of her current intentions regarding our parents' estate. The letter I had discovered in my father's study provided a snapshot of her strategy, but I needed to understand the full scope of her plans before I could effectively counter them. An opportunity presented itself when my parents announced they would be taking a 2-week Mediterranean cruise to celebrate their anniversary, a trip Vivienne had helped arrange. With both of them away, the family brownstone in Westchester would be empty, apart from their housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, who had known both Vivienne and me since childhood, and maintained a schedule of coming in 3 days a week to maintain the property. "Would you mind checking on the house occasionally while we're gone?" my mother asked during our weekly phone call. "Mrs. Winters will handle everything, of course, but it would be nice to know family is keeping an eye on things." Of course, I agreed immediately. I can stop by on the weekends. "Does Vivienne have a key as well?" I kept my tone casual, merely seeking practical information. "Yes, though she's so busy with the children's summer activities, I told her not to worry about it. She did mention she might stop by to pick up some old photo albums she wanted to digitize as a surprise for our return." This was the opening I needed: legitimate access to the house and advance warning of when Vivienne might be there. I immediately began planning my reconnaissance mission, determining that the ideal time would be during Mrs. Winter's day off when the house would be completely empty. When the day arrived, I drove to Westchester feeling a strange mixture of determination and guilt. I had never been the type to snoop or invade privacy, yet here I was planning to search my parents' home for evidence of my sister's manipulation. I reminded myself that I wasn't seeking to harm anyone, only to protect myself and potentially my parents from Vivienne's machinations. The family home looked exactly as it always had, a stately Tudor with ivy, climbing the brick facade and meticulously maintained gardens surrounding the property. I used my key to enter through the side door, calling out a habitual hello despite knowing no one was home. I moved efficiently through the house, beginning with my father's study, where I had first discovered the trust documents. The folder labeled Family Trust Amendment was no longer on the desk, but a careful search of his filing cabinet revealed a newer folder, Estate Planning 2024, Revisions. Inside, I found draft documents from Walter Kingsley's firm outlining potential changes to my parents' will and trust arrangements. The most recent draft, dated just 2 weeks before their departure, proposed a significant modification rather than the 75/25 split, favoring Vivienne. The new document suggested a 60/40 distribution, still unequal, but substantially more balanced. A handwritten note in my father's distinctive script on the margin read, "Consider equal split with restrictions." This single line confirmed my suspicion that my grandmother's equal treatment of us in her will had indeed prompted my parents to reconsider their own arrangements. More revealing was an email printout from Vivienne to Walter Kingsley, copied to my father, expressing serious concerns about the proposed revisions. She referenced Meridian's history of impulsive decision-making and suggested that any significant assets transferred to her control would be at risk of mismanagement or exploitation by unscrupulous parties. The email concluded with a recommendation for a structured trust with oversight protections, rather than direct inheritance, essentially proposing that whatever portion I received should be controlled by trustees. And who would those trustees be? The suggested list included Vivienne herself and Bradley. I carefully photographed these documents with my phone before returning them exactly as I had found them. My search continued through my mother's desk in the sunroom, where I discovered a handwritten letter from Vivienne expressing heartfelt concern about Merritt's stability following a supposedly worrying phone conversation, had a conversation that had never occurred. The most damning evidence, however, came from an unexpected source. In the guest room closet where my mother stored gift items and wrapping supplies, I found a shopping bag containing framed family photographs. These were not old photos but new ones professionally taken at Vivienne's vow renewal ceremony the previous year and at Christmas. What struck me immediately was that in the original versions of these photos, which had been displayed throughout the house, I had been present. In these new versions, I had been digitally removed, or the photos had been carefully recomposed during separate sessions to exclude me entirely. The implication was clear. Vivienne was literally erasing me from the family narrative, creating a visual history in which she, Bradley, their children, and our parents formed a complete unit without me. It was a physical manifestation of the psychological campaign she had been waging for years. I sat on the guest bed, the altered photographs spread around me, feeling a complex wave of emotions. There was hurt, certainly seeing oneself deliberately removed from family memories would pain anyone. But predominant was a cold, clarifying anger that crystallized my resolve. This wasn't sibling rivalry or casual undermining. This was a calculated effort to diminish my existence in our family's life and legacy. As I carefully returned everything to its place, ensuring no trace of my investigation remained, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key in the front door lock. Checking my watch, I realized I had spent far longer examining the documents than I had intended. It was now late afternoon, and someone likely, Mrs. Winters arriving early for her next day's work, was entering the house. I quickly gathered my belongings and slipped into the adjoining bathroom, planning to explain my presence as a quick stop to check on the house as requested. But the voice that called out wasn't Mrs. Winters's. "Hello, is someone here?" It was Vivian. I remained silent, heart pounding. Through the crack in the bathroom door, I could see her enter the guest bedroom where I had been sitting moments before. She glanced around suspiciously, perhaps noticing that something seemed disturbed, despite my efforts to return everything to its exact position. She walked to the closet and opened it, checking the shopping bag of photographs. Satisfied they were undisturbed, she closed the closet door and moved toward the bathroom. I had seconds to decide. I could reveal myself and create some excuse for my presence in this specific room, or I could hide and hope she wouldn't check the bathroom. Neither option was ideal, but confrontation seemed the riskier choice given what I had just discovered. Just as her hand reached for the bathroom doorknob, a phone rang, her cell phone. She answered immediately. "Yes, I'm at their house now," she said to the caller. "No, everything looks fine. I'm picking up those photographs to have them framed before they return." A pause. Of course, she doesn't know. Why would I tell Merritt anything about this? The less she knows about the estate planning, the better. Another, longer pause. "Bradley, I've handled this situation for years. Trust me, by the time my parents update their will, Merritt will be firmly established as the family liability we can't possibly entrust with significant assets." The dinner was just the beginning. By Christmas, she'll be lucky if they remember to include her at all. She laughed at something Bradley said, then responded, "Well, that's why I married a surgeon and not a digital marketing guru, or whatever she calls herself these days. Some people make smart choices, others don't. And consequences matter." She ended the call and, to my immense relief, left the guest room without checking the bathroom. I heard her footsteps recede down the stairs, followed by more movement on the first floor. 10 minutes later, the front door closed and a car engine started in the driveway. I waited another full 5 minutes before emerging, shaken but more determined than ever. What I had overheard confirmed everything I had suspected, and worse. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. This was about Vivian's pathological need to diminish me while elevating herself. The estate was simply the current battlefield in a war she had been waging since our childhood. As I drove back to Brooklyn that evening, I mentally sorted through my options. Confronting Vivienne directly would be futile. She would deny everything and use my accusations as further evidence of my instability. Going to my parents with what I had discovered would force them to take sides, potentially fracturing the family beyond repair. And litigation would be a nuclear option, exposing private family matters to public scrutiny and causing pain to everyone involved, including me. No, I needed a more elegant solution. One that would reveal the truth without destroying the family. One that would neutralize Vivienne's campaign, without requiring me to become as manipulative as she was. I know you're all invested in this story now, so before I continue to the next part where things really start to heat up, take a quick second to hit that like button if you're Team Meridian. If you've ever dealt with a manipulative family member, drop a quick emoji in the comments that represents how you felt in that moment. I read every comment, and knowing I'm not alone in these family struggles means everything. Now, let's get back to how I finally started turning the tables on Vivienne. After my narrow escape from Vivienne at our parents' house, I spent several days processing what I had learned and formulating a plan. I needed allies, people who had also experienced Vivienne's manipulations and would be willing to share their stories. More importantly, I needed someone whose testimony would carry unquestionable weight with my parents. My first thought was Bradley's sister Meredith. Despite Vivienne's efforts to keep us apart, Meredith and I had maintained a cordial relationship over the years. She had never openly criticized her brother's wife, but I had occasionally caught glimpses of frustration in her expression during family gatherings, when Vivienne was being particularly controlling. I invited Meredith for coffee at a quiet cafe in Chelsea, far from her Upper East Side neighborhood, where she might be seen by mutual acquaintances. When she arrived elegant in a simple linen dress that spoke of old money's understated luxury, her curious expression told me she understood this wasn't a routine social call. "Thank you for meeting me," I began after we had exchanged pleasantries. "I wanted to talk to you about something sensitive." Meredith's perfectly manicured fingers tapped lightly on her cup. "This is about Vivienne, isn't it?" Her directness surprised me. "Yes. How did you know?" "Because no one in our circle ever arranges secretive meetings in out-of-the-way cafes, unless it's about Vivienne," she said, with a wry smile. "What has my dear sister-in-law done now?" Over the next hour, I carefully shared selected portions of what I had discovered watching Meredith's reactions closely. I didn't reveal my snooping through my parents' papers, instead focusing on Vivienne's systematic campaign to portray me as unstable and financially irresponsible, culminating in the humiliating dinner seating arrangement. Meredith listened attentively, her expression shifting from polite interest to genuine concern, and finally to a kind of grim recognition. "You know," she said, "when I had finished the first Christmas after Bradley and Vivienne were married, I arrived at their holiday party in jeans and a sweater. Vivienne had told me it was a casual gathering, just family watching movies and eating takeout. Instead, I walked into a formal cocktail party with 50 of Bradley's colleagues. I looked like the family charity case." She took a sip of her coffee. When I confronted her later, she claimed there had been a last-minute change of plans that she'd tried to tell me about. Bradley believed her, of course. He always does. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Because it wasn't a miscommunication. It was deliberate. Just like your seating at that dinner wasn't a mistake." Meredith leaned forward. "Vivienne has been isolating Bradley from his family for years. She schedules conflicts when my parents want to visit their grandchildren. She forgets to relay messages. She has opinions about every holiday plan that somehow always result in minimal time with the Whitmore side of the family." A weight lifted from my shoulders, the validation of knowing I wasn't imagining things, wasn't being overly sensitive, wasn't the only one who had experienced Vivienne's manipulations. "Has anyone ever confronted her directly?" I asked. "My mother tried once. Vivienne cried, said she felt unwelcome in the family, claimed she was trying her best to balance everyone's needs. Bradley was furious with my mother for attacking his wife. They didn't speak for months." Meredith shook her head. "That's when I learned direct confrontation doesn't work with Vivienne. She's too skilled at turning it around, making herself the victim." I nodded, unsurprised. It matched everything I knew about my sister's tactics. "So what are you planning to do?" Meredith asked. "I assume you didn't invite me here just to commiserate." "I'm not entirely sure yet," I admitted. "But I know I need to show my parents who Vivienne really is before she completely poisons my relationship with them. And I think I need help to do it." Meredith studied me for a moment, then nodded decisively. "I'm in. Whatever you're planning, as long as it's not illegal and won't hurt the children, I want to help. Not just for your sake, but for Bradley's too. And for my parents, who barely get to see their grandchildren anymore." That conversation marked the beginning of what I came to think of as my strategic alliance. Over the next several weeks, I carefully expanded our coalition, approaching others who had experienced Vivienne's manipulations firsthand. There was Rachel Prentice, who had been Vivienne's closest competitor at her firm until a series of unfortunate misunderstandings had led to Rachel being passed over for partnership consideration. There was Daniela Suarez, a former member of the Cultural Board, where Vivienne now served as treasurer, who had resigned after conflicts with my sister that she had never fully explained publicly. And there was Colin Westfield, our cousin, who had once been close to both of us, until Vivienne had deliberately excluded him from family events, following a dispute over our grandmother's antique silverware. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: initial hesitation, careful sharing of experiences, and then most powerfully relief at finding validation and understanding. No one person knew the full scope of Vivienne's behavior, but together their stories created a comprehensive picture of her methods and motivations. My most surprising ally emerged when I received an unexpected text from Bradley's colleague, Dr. Richard Hammond, asking to meet privately. Curious and cautious, I agreed to coffee near his hospital. "I know this seems strange," he said after we had settled at a corner table, "but I overheard something recently that I think you should know about." He explained that during a surgical conference, he had been in an adjoining hotel room to Bradley and had overheard a heated phone conversation between my brother-in-law and Vivienne. "She was pressuring him to approach your father about some investment opportunity related to the family trust," Dr. Hammond explained uncomfortably. "Something about leveraging his position as medical advisor to suggest certain allocations for healthcare directives." Bradley was resistant, saying it crossed ethical lines, but she was persuasive. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He hesitated. "Bradley is a brilliant surgeon, but he's been different since he married Vivienne. More isolated from colleagues, more anxious about finances, despite their apparent wealth. Several of us have noticed. And that conversation. It didn't sound right. I thought someone in the family should know." With each new ally, my strategy evolved from nebulous ideas into a concrete plan. We wouldn't confront Vivienne directly, that would only trigger her victim response. Instead, we would create situations where her true behavior would be visible to those who needed to see it, particularly my parents. Meredith suggested hosting a family dinner at her home, neutral territory, where Vivienne wouldn't have control over the arrangements. Rachel provided insights into Vivienne's professional vulnerabilities, areas where her carefully constructed image was most fragile. Daniela shared documentation of financial discrepancies from the cultural board that raised questions about Vivienne's management of family resources. Most valuably, Colin, who had become a successful documentary filmmaker, offered his expertise in recording and presenting narratives. Not to create something manipulative, he clarified, but to help organize the evidence in a way that's clear and undeniable. By early September, with my parents' return from their cruise approaching, our alliance had a fully developed strategy. We would create controlled situations that would allow Vivienne's true character to reveal itself naturally. We would document everything meticulously. And when the moment was right, we would present the unvarnished truth to my parents in a way they couldn't dismiss or ignore. As our planning progressed, I felt a strange combination of determination and sadness. I took no pleasure in exposing my sister's decades of manipulation. Part of me still hoped for reconciliation, for the possibility that, confronted with the truth, Vivienne might recognize the damage her behavior had caused and make amends. But the stronger, wiser part of me understood that such hope was likely futile. Vivienne had spent her entire adult life constructing her perfect image and positioning herself as the family's golden child. She wouldn't relinquish that identity easily, not even when faced with irrefutable evidence of her manipulations. What gave me strength was knowing that for perhaps the first time in our adult lives, I wasn't facing her alone. I had allies who understood the truth and were committed to bringing it to light. Together, we would ensure that Vivienne's carefully constructed house of cards would finally face the wind it deserved. As my parents' Mediterranean cruise neared its end, our alliance finalized the details of our plan. The first phase would begin at a welcome home dinner Meredith had offered to host at her townhouse, a gesture my parents had gratefully accepted, tired from travel, and pleased by the opportunity to see both their daughters and grandchildren in one gathering. What they didn't know was that every element of the evening had been carefully orchestrated to create opportunities for Vivienne's true nature to reveal itself. The guest list included individuals she had manipulated or alienated. The seating arrangement positioned her where her reactions would be visible to my parents. Even the menu had been thoughtfully planned to include discussions of family recipes and traditions that would naturally lead to conversations about shared history and future legacy. Meredith had discreetly arranged for audio recording in the dining room legal in New York with one-party consent and with the knowledge of everyone in our alliance. We weren't creating a trap, I reminded myself repeatedly. We were simply ensuring that when Vivienne behaved as she always did, there would be objective evidence that couldn't be dismissed as misinterpretation or oversensitivity. The evening began as planned. My parents arrived looking tanned and relaxed from their cruise. Vivienne and Bradley entered with their children a few minutes later, Vivienne immediately taking control of the conversation to detail the work emergencies and children's activities she had managed during their absence. "And of course, I've been checking on the house regularly," she told them, conveniently forgetting that I had been the one officially asked to do so. "Everything's perfectly maintained." I caught Meredith's eye across the room and saw her subtle nod. Phase 1 was already underway, Vivienne positioning herself as the responsible daughter without prompting. During cocktails, Colin casually mentioned a family history project he was working on, recording stories from different generations. "I'd love to include both of you," he told my parents. "The perspective of siblings who grew up in the same household but experienced it differently is fascinating." "What a wonderful idea," my mother exclaimed. Vivienne was always so organized even as a child, and Meridian was our creative one, always with her head in the clouds. I maintained a pleasant smile, noting how automatically my mother fell into the established narrative of our childhood roles. Beside me, I felt rather than saw Vivienne's satisfaction at this characterization. "I have some great stories," I offered. Like the time Vivienne convinced me the basement was haunted so I wouldn't discover she was using it to meet her boyfriend after curfew. A flash of annoyance crossed Vivienne's face before she laughed lightly. "Oh, Merritt always had such an imagination. I think you're confusing that with the ghost stories Dad used to tell us." "No, I remember it clearly," I persisted pleasantly. "Jason, Elliott Jr. year. Mom and Dad were at that charity gala and you told me if I went downstairs I'd be possessed by the ghost of the previous owner. I was 12 and believed you completely." My father chuckled. "That sounds exactly like something that would have happened. You girls and your schemes." Vivienne's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened imperceptibly. Speaking of schemes, she pivoted smoothly. "Bradley and I have been discussing an investment opportunity we thought might interest you, Dad. Related to medical technologies, very stable returns." As dinner progressed, we continued our strategy of introducing topics and situations designed to highlight Vivienne's controlling behavior and revisionist history. When discussion turned to my grandmother's legacy, I deliberately mentioned how meaningful it had been that she had treated us equally in her will. "She always said capability was demonstrated through actions, not appearances," I commented, looking directly at my mother. "I've tried to live by that philosophy in my financial life as well." "About that," my father said, turning toward me with interest. "Your mother mentioned you've built quite an impressive portfolio. I'd love to hear more about your investment approach sometime." Before I could respond, Vivienne interjected. "Dad, remember what Walter said about speculative investments? Merritt's sector is notoriously volatile." "Actually," I countered calmly, "my portfolio is quite conservative. Mostly index funds and blue-chip stocks, with about 20% in municipal bonds. My risk tolerance is moderate at best." My father looked between us, confusion evident. Walter mentioned concerns about high-risk investments. "I wonder where he got that impression," I said, maintaining eye contact with Vivienne. "Since I've never met or spoken with him." The tension at the table was palpable. Bradley, sensing the direction of the conversation, attempted to change the subject to their children's school achievements. Normally, I would have allowed this diversion, retreating from confrontation as I had for years. But not this time. Before we move on, I said firmly, I'd like to address something important. For years, I've been aware that information about me reaching our parents has been filtered through Vivienne. Much of it inaccurate or deliberately misleading. Vivienne's facade of pleasant calm slipped momentarily. Merritt, this isn't the time or place. It never is it? I interrupted gently. There's never a right time to discuss why you told our parents I was financially irresponsible when I've been debt-free for years. Or why you seated me at the children's table at Le Cirque. Or why you've been digitally removing me from family photographs. My mother gasped, softly. What photographs? Meredith smoothly produced her phone, showing the edited Christmas photos I had discovered in my parents' house. I noticed these when Vivienne shared them in the family group chat. They're beautifully done, but I was confused about why Meridian had been removed. It was just better composition, Vivienne said dismissively, though a flush had begun to creep up her neck. The original photos were awkwardly balanced. And the trust amendment, I asked quietly, was that also about better composition? The room fell silent. My father's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Meridian, what are you talking about? I hadn't planned to reveal my discovery of the trust documents, but the moment demanded complete honesty. 3 months ago, I accidentally saw a letter Vivienne wrote to you both recommending you reduce my portion of the family trust, and suggesting I had debt and substance issues, all completely fabricated. Vivienne stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is absurd. I've always looked out for this family, including protecting our parents from your chronic instability. Is that what you were doing when you told Walter Kingsley that I was making speculative investments I couldn't afford, or when you told Mom and Dad that I preferred to sit with the children at your celebration dinner? I remained seated, maintaining a calm that contrasted sharply with her growing agitation. You've always been jealous of my success, Vivienne snapped, abandoning pretense entirely. You couldn't compete with my achievements, so you're trying to tear me down instead. Classic Merritt, always the victim, never taking responsibility. Bradley placed a restraining hand on her arm. Vivienne, maybe we should. She shook him off. No, I've worked too hard to build something meaningful while she's drifted through life making one bad decision after another. And now she's turned everyone against me with these ridiculous accusations. In her anger, Vivienne had forgotten the presence of our parents, forgotten the careful image she had maintained for decades. As she continued her tirade, detailing my supposed failings and her own sacrifices for the family, my mother and father exchanged shocked glances, witnessing a side of their elder daughter they had never seen before. I didn't need to say anything more. Vivienne was doing exactly what we had anticipated when cornered with the truth. She was revealing her true self more effectively than any evidence we could have presented. When she finally ran out of steam, the silence in the dining room was deafening. It was my father who broke it, his voice quiet but firm. I think he said slowly that we have a great deal to discuss as a family. But not here, not now. He turned to Meredith. Thank you for dinner. I apologize for the disruption. As my parents prepared to leave, my mother approached me. We'd like you to come to the house tomorrow morning, she said softly. Just you, not Vivienne. We need to hear your side of this directly. Vivienne, overhearing this, opened her mouth to protest, but Bradley finally exerted his influence, guiding her firmly toward the door. The look he gave me as they left was complex anger, mingled with a reluctant acknowledgement that perhaps he had been blind to aspects of his wife's behavior. After everyone had departed, our alliance remained at Meredith's townhouse, processing what had occurred. The confrontation had unfolded more dramatically than we had anticipated, but the essential outcome had been achieved. My parents had witnessed Vivienne's true nature firsthand, and were now open to hearing the full truth. Do you think anything will change? Colin asked, as we sat in Meredith's living room exhausted but relieved. I don't know, I answered honestly. But at least now there's a chance for truth. And that's more than we had yesterday. As I left to return to my apartment in Brooklyn, Meredith hugged me tightly. Whatever happens next, she said, remember you're not alone in this anymore. We're all witnesses to the truth now. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of unacknowledged gaslighting and manipulation pressing down on me. The hardest conversation still lay ahead with my parents, but a fundamental shift had occurred. The carefully constructed narrative that had defined our family dynamics for decades had finally begun to crack. The following morning dawned gray and drizzly weather that matched the somber nature of what lay ahead. I arrived at my parents' Westchester home at 10 o'clock, as requested, bracing myself for what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell, her face drawn with fatigue. We've been up most of the night, she said, by way of greeting, leading me into the living room where my father sat with a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. Meridian, he said, using my full name, rather than the diminutive, Merritt, that Vivienne had always preferred. I think it's time we talked honestly about some things that have been happening in this family. For the next 2 hours, I shared everything I had discovered over the past months. The letter in my father's study, the altered photographs, the systematic campaign to portray me as unstable and financially irresponsible. I showed them my financial statements, proving my actual fiscal responsibility. I played selected recordings from conversations where Vivienne had made demonstrably false claims about me. My parents listened without interrupting their expressions, shifting from disbelief to sadness to something approaching shame as the full picture emerged. Why didn't you tell us sooner? My mother finally asked. Would you have believed me? I countered gently. Or would you have seen it as confirmation of everything Vivienne had told you about my jealousy and instability? The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. For decades, they had accepted Vivienne's version of reality without question, unconsciously reinforcing the dynamic that positioned her as the successful, reliable daughter, and me as the perpetual underachiever. We failed you, my father said, his voice thick with emotion. We should have seen what was happening. You saw what Vivienne wanted you to see, I replied, not to absolve them, but to acknowledge the sophisticated nature of my sister's manipulation. She's been crafting this narrative since we were children. It became the reality we all lived in. Not anymore, my mother said with unexpected firmness. Whatever happens next, we need to deal with the truth no matter how uncomfortable. That afternoon they called Vivienne and Bradley to the house. When they arrived, Vivienne was clearly prepared for battle, armed with explanations and counter-accusations. What she wasn't prepared for was the methodical, factual approach my parents took in confronting her. We've seen the trust letter you wrote, my father stated calmly. We've compared it with Meridian's actual financial situation. We've spoken with Walter Kingsley, who confirmed you provided him with information about Meridian that you could not possibly have known firsthand, and which proves to be entirely false. We've also had the digital photographs analyzed, my mother added. And we found the originals in our own cloud storage. There was no composition issue. You deliberately removed Meridian from family photos you intended to display in our home. Vivienne's strategy shifted rapidly from denial to justification. Everything I did was to protect this family, she insisted. Merritt has always been impulsive, emotional. Meridian, my father corrected firmly. Her name is Meridian, not the childhood nickname you insist on using to infantilize her. And she's sitting right here. If you have concerns about her, address them directly, rather than manipulating us. It was perhaps the first time in our adult lives that my parents had directly challenged Vivienne's behavior toward me. The shock on her face would have been satisfying if the whole situation weren't so painfully sad. What followed was hours of painful but necessary conversation. Vivian alternated between tearful apologies, angry accusations, and attempts to reframe her actions as misunderstood good intentions. Bradley, to his credit, remained largely silent, his expression growing increasingly troubled as the full extent of his wife's manipulations became clear. By evening we had reached not reconciliation that would require far more time and fundamental changes that I wasn't confident Vivienne was capable of making, but a kind of reckoning. My parents announced their decision to revise their estate plan to provide equal inheritance to both daughters, with no special provisions or oversight for my portion. We've also decided to step back from financial entanglements with both of you, my father added. No more informal loans, no shared investments. You're both successful adults with your own resources. This pattern of financial dependency has contributed to unhealthy dynamics. When Vivienne and Bradley left, the tension in their relationship was palpable. I remained behind, accepting my mother's invitation to stay for dinner, the first time in years we had shared a meal without Vivienne present to control the narrative. "What happens now?" I asked as we sat in the kitchen, the formality of the living room conversation behind us. My father sighed heavily. "Healing, hopefully. Though it won't be quick or easy. Your sister has some deep issues to address, and your mother and I have our own responsibility in enabling her behavior for so long. And us," I gestured between myself and my parents. "Where do we go from here?" My mother reached across the table to take my hand. "We start over. We get to know the real Meridian, not the version Vivienne created in our minds. If you're willing to give us that chance." The path forward wasn't clear or certain. Vivienne remained my sister, and despite everything she had done, I didn't wish for her destruction, only for the manipulation to end and for the truth to be acknowledged. Whether she could accept this new reality remained to be seen. In the months that followed, our family underwent a painful but necessary transformation. My parents began therapy to address their role in the dysfunction. Vivienne and Bradley entered counseling as well, their marriage strained but surviving, as Bradley confronted his own blindness to his wife's behavior. As for me, I continued building my career and strengthening the relationships that had emerged from this difficult chapter. Meredith became a close friend rather than just an in-law. Colin and I collaborated on actual documentary projects that had nothing to do with family drama. My parents and I established new traditions and ways of connecting that weren't filtered through Vivienne's influence. And Vivienne herself, progress was slow and inconsistent. There were sincere moments of remorse and efforts to change interspersed with relapses into old patterns of control and manipulation. Complete reconciliation remained a distant possibility rather than an immediate reality. But at least now everyone involved understood the truth of our family dynamic. The gaslighting and revision of history had ended. The most profound change was internal. I no longer questioned my own perceptions or worth based on Vivienne's narrative. I recognized her behavior for what it was, the actions of someone deeply insecure despite outward appearances of success. Understanding this didn't excuse what she had done, but it allowed me to view her with compassion rather than resentment. 6 months after the confrontation at Meredith's dinner party, I received an unexpected text from Vivienne, asking to meet for coffee, just the two of us, no parents, no spouses, no audience. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We sat across from each other at a neutral cafe, halfway between her Manhattan townhouse and my Brooklyn apartment. For the first time in our adult lives, when she looked at me, I had the sense she was actually seeing me, not her competitor, not the threat to her position in the family, but simply her sister. "I'm not going to apologize again," she said, after we had exchanged awkward greetings. "I've done that, and words are cheap. But I am seeing someone, a therapist, twice a week, and I'm trying to understand why I felt so threatened by you that I needed to." She trailed off. "Erase me," I supplied. She winced but nodded. "Yes. That. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect us to suddenly become best friends. But I'd like to try something new, something honest for once. I didn't offer immediate forgiveness or assurances. The damage of decades couldn't be undone in a single conversation. But as we sat there talking tentatively about our separate lives, I felt a glimmer of possibility that hadn't existed before. The truth had finally been acknowledged. The power dynamic had been fundamentally altered. And in that space, uncomfortable and uncertain though it was existed, the potential for something we had never truly had, an authentic relationship, based on reality, rather than manipulation. As I left that cafe, I reflected on how a single humiliating dinner seating had catalyzed a complete transformation of our family system. The kids' table, intended as a tool of diminishment, had instead become the first domino in a chain reaction that exposed decades of deception. There was a certain poetry in that, a fitting sense of justice that vindicated not just me but everyone who had been manipulated in Vivienne's quest for dominance. Thank you all for following my family revenge story to its conclusion. If you've ever experienced family betrayal or had to confront toxic relationships with loved ones, I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. What family karma or justice moments have you witnessed? Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories, and share with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. I'm so grateful for this community that's helped me process my own journey and find healing. Remember, sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who hurt you deepest, but standing up for your truth is always worth it in the end.